It's been a while, but today we're looking at another video by Blue Jay. Specifically, how to win the Cold War. Probably involves a bunch of zany nuclear stuff, knowing Blue Jay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer, a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry. From engineering to operations to emergency response. Don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Let's get right into this.
1987, and Matthias Royst was going to save the world. The West German teen wasn't a fan of living as the sauerkraut in the middle of the world's sauciest nuclear sandwich, especially when neither side could agree to lay off the plutonium mayo. I guess I have to solve this myself.
Plutonium mayo. So plutonium is a lot more reactive than plutonium-239 is far more reactive than uranium-235. So you don't need as much of it to create a nuclear bomb. So plutonium mayo, and especially by 1987, late in the Cold War, both sides have refined their processes pretty well on how to create nuclear bombs. So lots of plutonium on both sides.
Stupid boy. So the 18-year-old wrote a 20-page manifesto, a sentence that normally screams stay home from school. But this manifesto detailed instructions for Gorbachev on...
Oh, the S thing. That thing seems to have been around forever. I buy that it's been around since 1987.
Advance world peace. The next steps of his plan were rather simple. All he had to do was take this manifesto, hop in a Cessna, and fly from the west directly into Moscow.
That flight path, I guess. Well, that might be the least restrictive air travel route back then. I don't actually know.
He'd hand deliver it to Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev himself. With only 50 hours of flight experience, Matthias took to the skies and into Soviet territory. Air defenses were put on high alert.
Okay, there we go.
Soviet MiGs pulled up next to and flew by him. But much like an Activision Blizzard employee, Matthias wasn't going to take no for an answer. Through sheer dumb luck, every surface-to-air missile and fighter jet was denied permission to engage, assuming he was just a dumb student with his transponder turned off. They realized their mistake too late once Matthias landed an aircraft directly onto Red Square, marking the first time a German invasion ever got to Moscow.
That's awesome. Man, I miss Blue Jay so much. That kind of humor.
Would Lenin think if he could see this? Oh, he's right there. After limited mingling, since he forgot one thing during his packing for a Russian diplomatic mission, the Russian language, he was arrested by the KGB and charged with not only violation of flight laws, but also malicious hooliganism, which if you've ever pounded dollaritas at Applebee's with Trey, you understand that term all too well. The embarrassment of the Soviet military gave Gorbachev the opportunity to push reforms and
I like the Pizza Hut thing, because Gorbachev opened the Soviet Union more to the west, so having him in a Pizza Hut commercial is pretty cool.
Hundreds of military officials once it was shown they couldn't even shoot down a measly civilian aircraft, except for that one time. While he wasn't able to build his imaginary bridge between east and west, having at least somewhat of an impact helped Matthias...
Is that dual-wielding machine guns? I think I've seen a few videos of that, so yeah, that's America. Especially in the 80s.
Handled this rejection well, but apparently only for 2 years, as he later stabbed a woman to the brink of death for it.
Good lord.
Why are you telling me all this? Just giving you some food for thought, Alex, because now it's up to you to end the Cold War and save the world. What? Why me? Why can't you leave me alone?
Because he's the chosen one.
Well, as you can see, I didn't do all that great of a job at it, and also, you're a lot of fun for me. But don't worry, Chip.
Is that supposed to be some sort of radioactive wasteland or something outside? So I know you've seen in a lot of my videos I routinely bring up that nuclear weapons can't end all life on Earth. But one thing I will say is during the height of the Cold War, we were closer because there were more nuclear weapons back then. Still wouldn't have been enough though.
Got a titillating tally of tales of wacky capitalist and commie shenanigans to help teach even you how to win the Cold War.
Gorbachev really wasn't a Pizza Hut commercial, you can't.
Alright, Alex, let's take you back to...
Now, if Gorbachev was in a commercial, a Domino's commercial with the Noid, that really would have been something.
Mid-1940s, the end credits roll in the World War sequel, and the Allies are partying in Berlin to celebrate Hitler's first good painting. But the fanfare only be short-lived, as a new tension was already brewing over the world's path forward: capitalism or communism. At the helm of this debate were the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, both of whom fought harder to collect economic allies than Nazi scientists. There was only room for one top gamer in this post-World War II scene, and as the main actors were now considering a trilogy, one was feeling rather confident with their early...
What is that? So nukes, obviously, but the US with a Russian rocket launcher, that's actually kind of funny. I wonder if he could have given the Soviets, like, an American rifle or something. That would have been pretty funny.
To the nuclear DLC. And that is why we must abolish private property. Break free of your chains, comrade. Ah, I see. That makes a lot of sense. But see this? Pretty cool, huh? Whoa, what is that? Capitalism, baby. I like that. Just wait.
I do remember in, like, my history class, there was this one... I forget who the quote was, but it was something like, if we could put a Sears catalog on every house in the Soviet Union, a lot of them would switch sides, or something like that, or all of them would have switched sides. Not sure how true that is, but especially considering it would be more like, here's all these products that you can't have, but... Yeah.
Democracy is indispensable to socialism. Yeah, okay, buddy. I didn't want to go here, but under capitalism, our boys back in Los Alamos cooked up a fun new toy for us. So you might want to reconsider.
Yeah,
what's the matter? Gulag?
The Soviets had spies during the Manhattan Project.
Wars were a lot more fun when you could kill civilians in very specific places, usually far away.
Oh, no.
But now that complete annihilation could be achieved from the press of a button by a teenager drafted from some farm in Idaho, countries were understandably a lot more hesitant to kick off World War III. Alright.
So things must have jumped ahead a little bit in the timeline, because the mutual assured destruction doctrine wasn't a thing in the 1940s, even right after the Soviets got the bomb, just because the Americans were ahead at that point. But we may have fast forward a few years, because the Soviets would surpass the Americans in terms of nuclear stockpile within the years and decades to come. But it would have been weird. The World War III would have been so, if it happened in like 1946, or the late 1940s rather, if the like Berlin blockade escalated like before the Soviets had the war, because it would have been one side with nukes and the other side wouldn't. Yeah, that wouldn't be what you would think of when you'd think of the Cold War or World War III, in terms of one side just nuking the other.
I want a nuclear holocaust, so let's just set down our guns.
Yeah, this must be set. We must have advanced the timeline further.
The proxy wars aren't the only way to win the Cold War, Alex.
Proxy wars?
Points towards victory could be scored through culture, intelligence, science, or military. Now let's take a look at what the U.S.
Reminds me of playing the Civilization games. Yeah, though I don't remember there being a spy victory, but it's possible that was a game I didn't play. I remember the culture victory, the science victory, the military victory, and then the diplomatic victory where everyone votes for you in the UN. So I guess in the Civilization timeline, the UN has absolute power and everyone would listen to the Secretary General. What a weird timeline that would be.
Soviets did to try to score points in these categories. You got this idea from the Civilization games. Shut the fuck. This is different. When you think intelligence, you probably picture a charismatic Brit from the 50s, goofy spy gadgets and gizmos, or a charismatic Brit from the 60s.
I don't recognize the one with the scouters all bunch of each other. Is that like, that's pretty good. Also a bird that isn't a blue jay.
Maybe a certain blue bird from the internet? No? Okay. Anyway, well, the reality of Cold War espionage consisted of a more mundane cocktail of surveillance and asset handling than a gin one. It did have its more shaken moments from time to time. Take Acoustic Kitty, the CIA project to transform your typical everyday cat into a world-class spy. The idea was to fit a cat with a microphone and radio and train them to approach Soviet officials to catch all that juicy commie gossip. Wouldn't they easily see a microphone and transmitter on a cat? Well, only if they're on top of the skin. What? Those lab boys back in the CIA dungeons decided to cook up a little Franken-Kitty, surgically implanting a microphone in a cat's ear canal, a transmitter at the base of its skull, and an antenna down the spine and tail just beneath the fur. With their crime against nature complete, they just needed to train the cat, deciding to use audio cues to control its directions. But as you cat owners already know, it doesn't matter how close you can get a cat to RoboCop, they'll always end up doing whatever they want. So while initial testing went well, outside the lab, it would just wander off whenever it got bored or hungry. And it was then that the CIA realized their mistake in this whole operation.
It might have worked better if they made like robots disguised as cats, but that would have been pretty hard to do. But the main thing for like wiretapping is a lot of submarines, nuclear submarines would do this because they could go deep within Soviet waters and listen in. And a lot of times they were undetected and would even plant bugging devices on the undersea cables to listen in. And they went undetected for a while, but the cat one, I mean, it involves cats, so of course that one's better.
They forgot to bypass that pesky sense of hunger. After one more operation, their abomination was now trained, wired, and hungered for nothing but tanky blood. The perfect cocktail of conditions for its first mission. Okay, we're here. Time to let the cat out of the bag. I'm reporting you to HR, Scott. Okay, Agent 009 Lives. This is what we've been training for, all right, buddy? It'll be a quick in and out, 20-minute mission. Just walk up to the guys on the bench and listen to what they have to say. Don't let curiosity kill the cat. Why are you allowed to? Because I have tenure, Scott. All right, Agent, here we go.
That's a real thing in a lot of government and like union-oriented positions. The tenure guy can get away with stuff I've seen, or seniority rather. I've seen some of that without my career. You're horrible. Horrible people.
Oh shit, Carl! Carl, grab me that shovel from the back. We gotta scrape this guy off.
According to Victor Marchetti, the cat was released from an unmarked van to eavesdrop on two men outside the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. when it was hit by a taxi almost immediately.
Wow.
Well, I know you had a lot riding on this acoustic kitty project, Ryan, but don't worry. I've had the boys back in the lab work on a new project that's sure to cheer you right
let's
up.
see this.
Introducing Electric Kitty. Robert Wallace disputed this bitter end, stating that in reality, the project was abandoned because the cat was too hard to train. Therefore, the equipment was surgically removed and it lived a, quote, long and happy life afterwards. Whether you believe the comically bad ending or the suspiciously happy one is up to you. But regardless, Acoustic Kitty took 5 years and $20 million just to end up in the trash can. Kinda like my college degree.
Sounds about like defense spending.
Big of an investment. I guess the lesson we could take away here is that there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Oh boy.
I hate you.
Oh boy.
So much. How about we take a peek at Soviet espionage, Alex? Oops. Looks like someone wasn't a good double agent. Jesus, was that necessary? Yeah, nobody really likes intel leaks, especially the Soviets, whose counterintelligence programs were far superior to the West. The key to their effectiveness was quite...
You spy, you're gonna get smirched. Yeah, that was pretty bad.
All they needed was a totalitarian state with an authoritarian government who gave them free rein to target absolutely any threat to sensitive intelligence, whether real or imaginary. As you can guess, many innocents were executed through these tactics, but their deaths would not be in vain, Alex.
Yeah, with people like Stalin at the helm, who's probably one of the most paranoid people ever. Yeah, I can only imagine what it's like living in that kind of fear of just because... They not only go after the individual, the leaker, but they would go after like everyone who knew them. Terrifying. I wouldn't even know the best way to survive in that sort of regime. Just avoid talking to anyone, but that would be suspicious too. Kind of a lose-lose.
For this aggressive mindset helped perfect Soviet murder tactics. Introducing the Bulgarian umbrella, perfect for all your rainy day and political dissident silencing needs. While appearing as an ordinary umbrella on the surface, this crafty device contained a hidden pneumatic mechanism that shot a ricin-filled pellet just 1.5 millimeters thick, or 15/254ths the thickness of a gumball to help you visualize. This elusive gadget made perfect for an assassin who needed to masquerade as, say, a comically inconspicuous British aristocrat on his morning stroll over a London bridge.
Yeah, it's the Kingsman thing, except it uses poison rather than just knocking someone out with a disc to the face.
Which just so happens to be the exact circumstances where one Georgy Markov was assassinated in 1978. Ugh, what a day. Maybe I'll listen to some BBC. I think I've earned being a little naughty.
This just in, Bulgarian correspondent Georgy Markov has informed the BBC that Todor Zivkov, quote, pours his milk before his cereal because he's a big, stinky, dumb poopy head. I say, that is poopy head behavior, Todd.
With technical assistance from the Soviet KGB, Zivkov had the Bulgarian Secret Service assassinate Georgy Markov on his own birthday. The writer was on Waterloo Bridge in London when he felt a sharp pain in the back of his leg and turned to find a man pick up an umbrella and immediately step into a taxi. He became sick that same evening, and 4 days later, he was dead. After an autopsy, a metal pellet with drilled holes was discovered in his leg, and the media went crazy over the Umbrella murder story. On paper, this sounds like a textbook espionage dub for the Eastern Bloc, but then again, when the Bulgarian umbrella is more present in Western media than actual history, who really benefited most at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's just, I never knew the origin of the Kingsman umbrella, because that's mainly what I think of it as. Now, it could just be that Western media is that much more popular.
I mean, I don't know if you can really call an episode of NCIS as capitalizing more than an actual assassination. You're right, I'm just being facetious. The Soviets definitely take the intelligence dub in this bout. While the CIA get points for creativity, coming up with an intricate and elaborate cyborg cat spy thing, the Soviets kept it simple.
I like these most, it's the most arbitrary things that they take. Of like this 1v1 out of context stuff from like the zaniest stuff is like, hey, that's how we score intelligence. It's like, because to be fair, that's a bit how certain things are evaluated in like when you have someone take a subjective look, even when it comes to things like a simulator crew performance on a Nuclear Regulatory Commission exam. You take those every year for the nuclear power reactor operators. I've seen some comments that were subjective to the point of, well, the supervisor didn't look like he maintained command and control. I mean, yeah, they did everything fine and they basically saved the day. All the scenario went good, but it was something about his posture seemed off. I've seen those sort of comments versus actual results. So there's a bit of acting involved in working in the control room of a nuclear plant, which I didn't expect until I got there.
Air and poison go forward. So Alex, the lesson here is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how cunning or crafty you try to be, you'll never be as effective as good old-fashioned murder. Next up is the science victory. Wow. And what better battle of science in history is there than the space race? The space race was a competition between the Americans and Soviets for superior spaceflight capability. And while many people today think this was settled when Elon bitch-slapped Bezos by putting a Tesla into orbit, the real story is much more nuanced. Both nations have their aerospace origins in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, with Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and Robert Goddard, who are considered two of the founding fathers of aeronautics. Both of
space chimps and space buddies.
Guys made a bunch of important.
Let's see what we got here. Okay, actual accomplishments. Okay, I was expecting something silly.
Rocket
Let's
advancements.
Just wait for it.
For example, Goddard is notable for inventing the first liquid-fueled rocket.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, I did it. Come quick. The Soviets are so fucked in 40 years. Most people crown the Nazis as the sole king of early rocketry, but both the US and Soviets have been progressing in these fields as well. In fact, the Soviets' rocket tech was on par with the Nazis in the early 1930s. That is, until Stalin's policies slowed things down a bit.
Oh, at least in the terms of the V-2 rocket, Nazi Germany, this was part of their Hail Mary attempt to try to recover their losses in the war and try to some crazy weapon that's going to intimidate the Allies into surrendering so they can try to focus on regaining ground during the Soviets. But even if that did, I don't think that would have worked. Even if they did somehow convince the Allies to surrender.
Talking about Jesus Christ! Nevertheless, the Soviets kicked off the space race by launching the first ever artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, a big ball with 4 antennas, a clear nod to the all-powerful flying spaghetti monster. Inside the little satellite was a radio that transmitted menacing beeps to the people below, sending a clear message of its existence and terrifying Americans as it flew overhead.
Welcome back to WTTL, your station for all things Elvis. But first, a message from our sponsor, Dr. Lang's Lobotomies, ideal for hysterical women.
What?
Use code BRAINBLAST for 20% off for Noggin November. And
can you imagine if advertisements back then were kind of like these little plugs you see in YouTube videos now?
remember, you're one snip away from a wife who obeys.
Yeah, oh, I hate that. The Soviets immediately responded with Sputnik 2, this time putting the first animal into orbit, a dog named Laika. They just snatched a random stray, figuring if anything can survive the hellscape that was the Moscow streets, then the literal exosphere shouldn't be that different. After a bunch of training, Laika was strapped up and launched into orbit. She was never intended to survive the mission, so they planned to ease her suffering with some poisoned food later in the trip, which would have been great if she hadn't been roasted in a makeshift air fryer in the first few few hours when an engine failed to separate. This is due to the fact that the spacecraft was both designed and built in only 4 weeks in order to hit the launch deadline.
Whoa.
America responded with their own launch and the formation of NASA. Both sides are now just popping off more satellites, dogs, monkeys, and finally naked monkeys.
Naked monkeys as a person. That is one thing about space that a lot of people don't realize is you actually can get a fair bit of dose from radiation because you're beyond the atmosphere. The dose limit for radiological workers, say in a nuclear power plant, is significantly higher than to a member of the public by a factor of 50, but no one ever really gets that much under normal conditions because the amount, while it is much higher, it's still only half of the amount of dose you would get that would result in negative side effects such as an increased risk of cancer. And we're talking well below the radiation poisoning threshold. But in space, especially back then where things weren't as monitored, astronauts can get a lot more dose than people that work in nuclear power plants or people that work in uranium mines. Which is kind of crazy. I even looked up on on NASA's website, and there wasn't really a straight answer as far as what the dosage was or what the limits were, because there have been people that have been on the International Space Station for close to a year, if not over a year. So you just wonder. I mean, I'm sure it's tracked and monitored because anything with studying with people in space is monitored even more so than people in a radiological controlled area as far as like all aspects of their life. You really wonder about how much dose some of these people getting. And back then it was, well, to the wild, unknown territory, so you know they weren't looking.
Yuri Gagarin beating Alan Shepard to the punch as first talking animal in space by just a few weeks. Things then started getting real serious when John F. Kennedy got elected and announced the U.S. would throw a dude on that cool rock in the sky by the end of the decade.
Cool rock
Congratulations
in the sky.
on your election, President Kennedy. Just to get you up to speed on things, the Cold War has been progressing. Cold War, huh? I'll show those Soviets cold. Grab those NASA nerds, General. We're going to space. No, not that kind of cold. Fuck it, the moon. But don't.
That's awesome. If that's the misunderstanding of the Cold War.
Right away, sir. Consider it done. Good. Sorry about that. He would have just kept going. Does he seriously not know what Cold War means? Just humor him for now. All
Obviously, a Cold War is between two competing ice cream trucks.
problems will be solved in Dallas. After many achievements on both sides, like the first spacewalk and the first docking in space, the US would go on
Can't believe he went there. All right.
just that, fulfilling man's innate desire to secure the biggest rock on the playground with the Apollo program. While putting a guy on the moon is cool and all,
It's crazy how long it's been since we've been back to the moon. And yes, I believe we actually made it to the moon. I know there's conspiracy theories out there that it was fake.
not as cool as the first living beings to reach the moon, tortoises. The Soviets decided to shoot a pair of them around the moon, probably because they saw America put out a movie called Planet of the Apes and were like, suka blitz, choosing an animal with natural armor in case any space monkeys came a-clubbing. I think
That is awesome. I never knew about the turtles, but that's cool.
that's not the case. We're talking about spaceflight, Alex. Can't you let a bird dream? The tortoises made it around the moon, and unlike earlier, these animals
What is that? Some kind of turtle satellite thingy? I love this.
returned safely to be rescued and dissected. The US also had its fun share
Yep.
of animals in space. My favorite being the time they shot a bunch of jellyfish into the cosmos. For science. They swear. 2,000 of the little critters went up, and chemicals were used to get them swimming and reproducing, which they did. Very well. They landed with 60,000. But once the astrofish came back, they weren't able to swim around very well because they just straight up didn't have a concept of gravity.
Yeah.
Gah, run, Aaron! Gravity doesn't apply to them!
That is interesting though, because if you have, if people were born in space or even on Mars and say lesser gravity, they come to Earth, they're probably going to need some Earth suits because they're just not used to the gravity. Their muscles will have atrophied. They might also grow in kind of a weird way because on Earth, we've evolved such that our height and weight is optimized for our gravity. So I guess if you take enough generations of humans that were like engineered to live in space or on other planets, they wouldn't really look very human after a while. Could involve some use of genetic engineering and genetic mutations, which certain targeted radiation can help with that. Now, it's mainly only used to induce mutations on like certain crops, like cotton, for instance. in order for it to be more heat resistant. But if you get better and more targeted for things like humans, that could be potentially one thing that's used to colonize other planets or expand more into space. Because what you see in sci-fi, the whole like artificial gravity and all planets being Earth-like, that's something that's quite taken for granted.
The space age deserves an entire video of its own, but I know you nerds are foaming at the mouth to hear who I think won the space race. Let me just put it this way. Between the two countries, only one killed the cutest dog I've ever seen and later had their own scientists regret it and claim they didn't get enough out of the mission to justify her death. So that's about as clear of an L as I've ever seen. And if you want my more detailed answer, you'll have to wait for my behind the scenes commentary on my second channel. You're really going the gatekeeping shameless plug route? Shh, can you hear that? No, that's right. There's no one to hear you scream. Next up is the culture section, and just to be upfront, America wins this category, hands down. Kids are hitting layups in Mongolia, but for the sake of checking all our boxes, we're gonna talk about it anyway. Soda, pop, or carbo, as I guess some degenerates call it, is just
Never heard carbo. Pop? There's a line, I think somewhere where you get up into the Midwest in the US, we'll call it pop. And then when I lived in Atlanta, I think just about everyone called soda Coke, because it's the land of Coke. But never heard carbo.
Synonymous with America is the bald eagle itself, and that was precisely the problem for Georgy Zhukov. Hero of the Soviet Union, defeater of Nazis, Zhukov became a big fan of Coca-Cola ever since Eisenhower introduced him to it around the time of World War II. But the delicate fizzy cocktail was banned in the Soviet Union, and Zhukov, being prominent in the public eye, couldn't be seen consuming a symbol of American imperialism. We know what happens when Stalin gets cranky.
Yep, that's highly accurate.
So he decided to reach out to US President Harry Truman for a solution to his dilemma. President Truman?
Zuki, are you considering defecting?
No, stop asking. I was actually calling to see if you could help me acquire some coke.
Well, we were saving most of it for black neighborhoods, but I think we could...
Wow, I knew exactly where that was going. Though I know Coca-Cola did have a little bit, way in the old days when their product said it relieves fatigue.
No, wow, Jesus, I'm talking about Coca-Cola. I can't be seen getting it in the Soviet Union. They wouldn't allow for it. Can you help me out with this?
Maybe you could?
Other than overthrowing my government.
I'll get you one of these days. Let me see if I can work something out.
Truman reached out to Coca-Cola, who then developed White Coke, a special clear version of Coke that had its food coloring removed and was packaged in clear glass bottles with a white cap and red star. This way, when Zhukov wanted a nice, refreshing Coke, the public wouldn't see their idol drinking a Yankee abomination, just half liters of vodka. Coke. In the image of war hero turned alcoholic veteran was a Soviet-fitting brand the public could very much so get behind. But let's check on America and the yin to Coca-Cola's yang, Pepsi. In 1959, Pepsi participated in the American National Exhibition in Moscow, which showed off what it means to be an American. Here we see Soviets observing a motionless car from behind, an allusion to driving in an East Coast city. Over here, Khrushchev is experiencing the wonder that is an American kitchen. Will he try his hand at operating the washing machine? No, they brought a woman for that. Gee, watching your wife work sure is tiring. How about a nice refreshing Pepsi to take the edge off? This photo was exactly the marketing juice PepsiCo needed in the ongoing cola wars, and it led to Pepsi acquiring a monopoly on cola in the Soviet Union. With restrictions on the ruble, Pepsi exchanged their scrumptious syrup for vodka, which they could then sell for cash. This deal remained in place until Pepsi's growth outpaced the vodka's growth, leading to a renegotiation. Yeah, this vodka deal was great and all, but there are only so many kids with fake IDs in the States. Not to worry, comrade, we've arranged an offer for you. What is this? Something to go with Naval Fleet. Ah, there it is. What are you doing? You want
pirates? What?
To bring something new to the table, so I bring ships to table. Thank you, Igor. Пожалуйста. Figuratively! Bring something figuratively to the table! And why would I want a naval fleet? To help with your current conflict with Coca-Cola. You are in Cola War, are you not?
Oh, that's awesome.
Figuratively!
Cold War,
the Soviet Union gave Pepsi 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer as payment for soda.
I had no idea. That's insane. It really does sound like a silly joke, but yeah. No, not actual vessels, sure.
You may have heard this story before, as it's become somewhat of an internet legend in recent years, with articles and your know-it-all nerd friend Kevin claiming this trade made Pepsi the 6th largest navy in the world at the time. This actually wasn't quite the case. These vessels were outdated and gonna be sold for scrap, but even still, they wouldn't have made Pepsi even remotely close to the 6th largest navy in the world at the time.
Yeah, I doubt they gave them like a nuclear submarine or something. That would be pretty crazy. Of course, if that was the case, I'm sure that would have been how Pepsi joined the nuclear arms race, or how nuclear proliferation entered the private sector, or something.
In fact, when I dug into the story deeper, there seemed to be a lot of scrutiny as to whether or not this even happened in the first place. I was able to find 2 articles from 1989 claiming the sale did take place, and political expert Dr. Paul Musgrave wrote a feature about the story and says that it definitely happened and is attested to in other sources. To me, it seems most likely that Pepsi acted as a sort of middleman in the exchange of Pepsi for a few $1 million worth of Soviet vessel scrappage. But this was just a small fry compared to the big kahuna that would transpire the coming year. A multi-billion-dollar deal where the Soviets would build brand spanking new oil tankers for Pepsi. That's right, liquid gold for fizz to behold. Things were starting to look up for little old Pepsi. Well, surely a
And that's why Coke does better than Pepsi, because of the fall of the Soviet Union.
Decade monopoly would consolidate a strong lead in the market. Oh, that's embarrassing. Last but not least, we have the military category. The US and Soviets had to get creative with this one, as in the world of nuclear juiciness, we typically want to avoid terraforming the Earth into a radioactive wasteland.
I like that the Burger King's still there, though maybe more of a Waffle House if you gave the whole Fallout makeover. By the way, if you're going to do something like that, it would take a lot of surface detonations to cause that much contamination that you see in those games. It's insane. Oh, and by the way, no amount of contamination would result in the monstrous creatures like giant crabs and stuff you see there. From what I've heard in Fallout, they had even more nuclear weapons that was in the actual Cold War, which is crazy. I guess it's plausible with enough nukes.
But the moon is fair game. It's 1958. Americans are panicking after the Sputnik launch, and the US needed a strong response to show they weren't falling behind. Okay, boys, where's Captain Lloyd? I believe he's taking his wife to an appointment at Dr. Lang's lobotomies. About time. Anyway, let's get started. We need to do something big to boost public morale. What do you got for us, General Clint? The Army is working on our own satellite program. I say we put our faith in the Explorer 1 launch. That'll be good, but we'd still only be second. What about you, Major Tom? I believe we should focus on
Major Tom. Perfect reference.
Mercury, sir, and putting the first man in space. Good, I like it. And your thoughts, Alfred the Moon Hater? The United States...
Oh, here we go. The nuking the moon thing. Let's see.
Of Project A119, a plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon's surface. Their hope was that the explosion would be large enough to be visible from Earth with the naked eye, and consequently boost public morale once they witnessed the extent of America's might. But
it would take a lot of nuclear weapons to do something like that, and also wouldn't explode like it would on Earth since there's no atmosphere. Though one thing I will say is it would be what would be more hazardous about detonating a nuclear weapon on the moon versus Earth. If someone's in like an orbiting satellite of the moon, they're more likely to get a bunch of dose because it's going to travel through space uninhibited, and also they'd be a lot closer to the explosion because geosynchronous, or I guess lunar synchronous orbit is a lot closer, and the radiation not inhibited by atmosphere or air, all of that neutron dose, which is very high dose, is going to travel through space. Also, lots of gamma radiation. If this is a fusion-based nuclear weapon, like they would have had those in the 1950s and 60s, since hydrogen bombs were a thing. So just all kinds of radiation is gonna come after you. But the actual explosion wouldn't be as big because there's no oxygen. That's where all the fire and explosion.
Of course, they need to sell some additional reasons beyond explosions are sick, bro. So it would help answer some rudimentary astrogeological questions. What? Yeah.
Plus, the other thing on nuking the moon is the moon already has so many craters on it, it would just make another one. And you'd kind of have to pick a spot that I guess doesn't already have a crater just so you'd be able to even see it with the naked eye. You'd be able to tell with radiation detectors that a nuclear detonation occurred.
Science and shit. A team of America's top minds got to work calculating the sweet spot between popping off the world's most expensive firecracker and flashbanging the northern hemisphere while kinetically bombarding Venus. They landed on a warhead with a 1.7 kiloton yield, detonated right on...
Okay, that is small. That's smaller than the one for that was detonated on Hiroshima. So not a military doctrine person, but that would put it probably at the high end for tactical nukes, but well below anything that would be used to attack a city.
Ironically named Terminator line, where the light side of the moon touches the dark side, but not too
That's an
far
awesome
over where it's
name.
all dark and scaly. While it was found to be technologically feasible, this project was cancelled for a few reasons. One, they were
you
afraid
could
of the
do
danger
it.
to the public if the launch were to fail, which if we just take a peek at launch success rates in the 50s and 60s, we'd call this worrisome. Two,
Yeah, if the rocket were to explode. But the nuke would be destroyed and you'd have bits of radioactive material that would land in wherever this thing happened to explode, depending on where it was in flight. While the nuke wouldn't detonate, it would still be a potentially nasty radiological hazard.
potential nuclear fallout would have made the moon landing photos look less like a heroic triumph and more like an HBO show. And three, because
That is one thing about on the subject of fallout. So a ground detonation, the moon is not a very low energy environment. So like on Earth, where you have wind, water currents, everything is eventually going to diffuse itself out. On the moon, where it would take thousands, if not millions of years just to get rid of the astronauts' footprints, contamination's going to stay there for a while. Basically, within the span of humanity, we would have to clean it up on the moon. So Chernobyl liquidator type folks on the moon. Imagine that.
exploding nukes on the moon might look, cartoonishly evil or something. Personally, if it were up to me, I'd
It
say
would be.
act first, make YouTube apologies later. That's why we wouldn't put you in positions of power. Right you are, Alex. I would just take it by force. But how to overthrow a democratic
Wow.
government is a video for another day.
Yep.
Let's see what the Russians have in store for the
A lot of that
military
happened during the
category.
Cold War.
Long-range bombers were all the rage in the mid-20th century. After all, you needed some way to bring the bigger and brighter suns you're building to all your friends. And with advancements in anti-air shooty things, these bombers needed to fly higher and faster to keep their
Oh, that's a cute little bomber face wanting to get away from it. I like it.
spicy little presents safe. Introducing the Tu-22, the first supersonic bomber to enter
at
production
that.
in the Soviet Union, even after both prototypes were destroyed in testing, killing multiple people. Third time's the charm, eh? Begin full production, we'll fix it on the go. And
Wow,
fix it on
yep.
the go, they did not. While it had an intimidating look that was really hammered home by
That definitely has that Cold War retro futuristic look to it. I like it. Wouldn't be caught dead in that thing, though.
impressive chompers, this would turn out to be more of a warning to its own crew than adversaries, as it was plagued with a stupendous amount of serious problems. Design issues included wings that would deform and partially melt at high speeds, terrible
Wow.
stability that had the pilot essentially arm wrestling the yoke the entire flight to keep being a plane, and a terrible cockpit layout that was described as a, quote, inverted hedgehog, with levers so
Ugh.
far out of reach that pilots had to
Sonic.
improvise ropes and hooks to operate them. But perhaps my favorite design flaw was the ejection system, which didn't shoot crewmen upwards like you'd imagine. That's where the precariously placed turbines sat hungry for breakfast.
Yeah,
but rather
it shoot
below
'em
the
down.
plane, where the ground is. This meant that ejections were only safe above 350 meters, and when you take into account most accidents occur during takeoff and landing, you might as well stick it out if you run into trouble on the runway, or
Yeah, that I guess you'd have to, because if you put the jets above, I've never seen anything. So I'm not an aircraft expert, but I've only seen those are the things you'd see like on the back of like passenger jet or something larger than a fighter or bomber. But yeah, that's crazy.
being turned into fertilizer. There were even times where people just straight up fell out of the plane. Granted, this would happen while
Wow.
the aircraft was parked and safely intact. Unlike the
Still,
crew
you could
spines.
still
All of this
hurt
would earn the
yourself.
bomber one of its many colorful nicknames, Man-Eater, due to its quirky little knack of killing many of its own crewmen with an astronomical failure rate of 70 units lost out of 311 produced.
Whoa. To give you a sense of what normal looks like, at least within the nuclear industry, anything involving like a failure or like a risk-related metric for nuclear grade stuff, 1 in a million. That's one incident in a million of something causing fuel damage. So not an accident that involves a release or someone getting killed, but just fuel damage, even contained fuel damage. Say a 3 Mile Island style accident where no one actually died, but fuel damage occurred, but it was safely contained. 1 in a million is considered an unacceptable risk. 1 in 10 million, and this is instances per year. So 1 in a million years, basically. 1 in 10 million, then high would be 1 in 10 million, medium 1 in 100 million, and 1 in a billion being low. Something like that. That depends a little bit on the actual test, but you get the idea. 23% is horrific.
Baldur's Gate friends out there, that's roughly equivalent to rolling a d4, and if it's a 1, you die. All things considered,
Yeah.
pilots were not very excited to fly this death trap. However, it was an extremely sought after assignment for crews, and that, my dear Alex, can be traced back to the coolant system. Coolant? That's right, Alex. The cockpit had an overheating problem that was solved with an evaporator supplied with a shocking amount of coolant. This coolant was a mixture of 60% distilled water and 40% ethanol, and when we pour that into our handy little analyzer here, it ran on vodka? It ran on vodka, yes. Naturally, they were
That has got to be the most Russian stereotypical thing I've heard.
numerous reports of crews drinking the plane's coolant and getting, quote, paralytically drunk, earning the plane its most popular nickname, Supersonic Booze Carrier. Pilots of the bomber even had complete control over how much coolant was consumed during flight, or if any was used at all. Jesus,
They have to
you
be
look
drunk to
terrible.
fly this
My name's
plane.
actually Vlad, but thank you, sir. I just need to cool off. Did you and Alec run out of coolant? Oh, yeah. We used it up real fast, and we didn't kiss or anything. What? I'm just saying, I didn't kiss a guy.
I actually remember playing one video game, I think it was one of the Mercenaries games, where they had this drunk pilot, Russian stereotype pilot, that said he had to be drunk to fly his jet effectively. But you never see what type of jet it is, and now we know. Thank you for pointing this out, Blue Jay.
Asking. You're just coming off really accusatory, and I just want to be crystal clear that I did not gingerly touch lips with Alec. Nothing happened. Right. Do you need more coolant then?
More coolant?
That would be most appreciated. Interestingly, it appeared as though the coolant was utilized with a shocking efficiency, as aircrews post-flight reports would show 100% of it was used during flights. The Air Force would later crack down on this,
And I
restricting
bet it was only designed to be used for, like, to be replaced, like, once every 100 flights or something like that.
to bombers between flights and closely monitoring coolant levels. However, keeping Russians from vodka is like trying to keep predators from Roblox, so they found a way to keep the practice alive anyway. While neither of these stories are really strong wins for either side, I'd have to award the Soviets the point for this one, as between the
Being
two,
more creative.
well, it actually happened, and for all its flaws, you mean people dying? For all its flaws, it at least helped boost airman morale. And as my cool college friend Scott once said, stop bringing your Game Boy to the club. I mean, when life leaves you drowning in stress, might as well choose the liquid. He flunked out, but I think the wisdom
Wow.
still stands. So, Alex, looks like we've got a solid tie
tie.
here. Think you've got what it takes to win this Cold War? What? Half of these stories were disasters. I didn't learn anything useful. I've got no idea what to do. Alex, what did Scott say about drown?
Sounds about like an arbitrary evaluation.
Choose the fluid? Choose the fluid, Alex. Attaboy. Now plug my merch. Good, good. The Cold War, 9 out of 10 stars.
So I guess it was a draw. I always love learning new obscure things about science and history. I had no idea people considered nuking the moon. I thought that was just some meme topic that showed up recently, but what a disaster for space exploration that would have been. Always good to see another Blue Jay video, though. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.